you can take and use on any part of the Bible. So then in that regard, it's not we're selecting, but we're giving them access to the whole counsel. So answering on that one, then your next question was, well, what about the shredding and the mystery? You know, and that's good. I think that what we found is when you help people to see the deepness and the richness in the scriptures as part of a story, that they understand the story in its context more. One thing that really touched me is there's a story where God calls Moses, and Moses says, well, I'm not a good speaker, not since the time you spoke to me here before. And God says, well, who made man's mouth? Did I not make the blind and the deaf and all these things? And so you look at this passage and you begin to probe into it, and you think, wow, God called Moses because of his weakness, so God could show his glory. But then this question comes up, well, wait a second, God said I make people blind. I mean, what are we going to do with that? And even by getting and grappling into the story, we begin to say, well, God said he made people blind. Well, what's going on? What are we learning about God here? Well, in the same way he made Moses slow of speech to use for his glory, he made people perhaps blind to use for his glory too. And imagine going to a couple that has a child that was perhaps born with Down syndrome, and giving them that message that God made your child, and he wants to bring glory through that. So to me, that brings out the mystery and the wonder even more so.
This kind of thing also reminds us of the fact that none of us exactly can predict what story or what passage, what impact it will have on a culture, especially not our own. Sometimes we're surprised even within our own culture, but especially going cross-culturally, sometimes the story speaks a message that is true and legitimate, but not one we would have predicted. People see that. So,
can I share a story on that?
Probably not.
Okay.
We need to talk to David about what he's doing. You're working in the interior of Brazil,
yes.
Tribal people, an approach that's self-consciously oral, and yet I thought your paper describing that was interesting because my own involvement with grassroots oral informal training is that we did have a significant percentage who wanted to bridge out of oral learning into literate ways, and your training incorporates some of that. Talk to us about your thinking about
yes.
oral and the literate elements, and also in terms of language, you're helping them move out of their language into the national language.
Yes, we're dealing basically with 5 or 6 language groups at a time in any given Bible school or in any given elementary school for adults. So we're looking at a larger number of complex issues. The schools can only be taught in one language. That has to be Portuguese in Brazil. That's already a handicap. Many of the students, Indian students from different Amazonian tribes, are in the process of still learning how to speak and understand Portuguese. Okay. What have we done? We've decided to teach the school in Portuguese using simpler language, but at the same time always remembering we want to take them from where they're at and help them to transition through the Bible school and the elementary school for adults so that they can be productive citizens in Brazil. So obviously, it's a wonderful complex mix of orality, storytelling, but at the same time, they need to know, to be useful citizens in Brazil, how to read and write. And so the way we've divided it up in the morning, and we include the children that are there, the students' children, along with possibly non-participating spouses. The first half of the class time is storytelling time. Very informal. They can sit on the floor. If the kids are making a little bit of noise, that's no problem either. We tell the stories. Of course, we have to choose the best storytellers to tell the stories, because as we found out, the students picked up on some of us who were agonizing storytellers. They said one girl we didn't like her, she isn't a good storyteller because she has a high-pitched voice. We hadn't picked up on that. But then the second part of the day is using as a starting point, the stories that were transmitted orally, and of course checking to make sure they understood the stories, repeating it a couple of times. Then we transition out of that into writing at whatever stage the individual students are at, writing a short text onto paper and doing reading and writing and competition and other of these type of exercises. So it's the orality, but along with reading and writing as we help them transition into the Brazilian national culture.
Yeah, and I didn't say earlier, but I want to clarify, this program is not theological education per se, right?
Okay.
You have a separate theological training track. What you're describing is something that has certain Christian content. It's not theological training. Am I correct?
Right. We're talking in two separate schools. The first, since 1996, is an elementary school for adults. Basic Brazilian school subjects, including a good dose of Bible, in a differentiated school setting where we teach less each day, we speak slower, and we use storytelling. The second part is a several-month-long Bible school, again, where on an average school day, the beginning of the class time would include one story. Of course, it could be a longer story, depending on the part of the Bible that we're studying. And we start from the very beginning with creation, and then go through most of the important points in the Old Testament, and then through the New Testament. But these are two separate schools, elementary school for adults, and then a longer Bible school.
That you've mentioned in the paper, Miriam hasn't hers. There are many more approaches to learning than just storytelling in all cultures. Miriam, remind us some of those, and we'll come back as well.
Okay.
But these you talk
yeah,
to
I
today.
think in yours too, I don't know which of your schools, but you had drama, you have science projects where you're exploding rockets into the jungle or something.
Yeah.
You have a song in a couple of languages.
Yes.
And you also have extensive prayer, which I would say is a way of learning as well.
Yes.
All of these are learning. Yeah, in my, what did I talk about? All these things.
Yeah.
And I think I talked about 5 kinds of action learning: drama, dance, object lesson, liturgy, which could be puberty ceremonies, house blessings, all kinds of things, and apprenticeship. That is learning by doing, learning through service.
Right. And as I recall, Deb, you made a lot of active learning.
Yes.
In your talk, just a few examples of that kind of thing.
Okay. We would use dramatization quite frequently, perhaps as frequently as 2 or 3 times a week. We choose a storyteller, we work as a team, but one person is in the front telling the story, and we're there adding whatever needs to be added. So the story is told, retold, perhaps 1 or 2 times after that. But then to further fix it into the minds of the student, it could be presented as a video clip if there's an appropriate Bible video clip of the story, or we would do it as a drama. Of course, not Academy Award performance, but us as the teachers, staff, including students, in a dramatization of the same story.
Right, good. Jackson, one of the things you picked up, and one of the things that you wrote in your paper I want to pick up on,